Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Zeinab Badawi. The row between the European Union and China over solar panels has put the focus on China's overproduction in many areas of industry. Europe says it's dumping solar panels at a price that's lower than the cost of production, and overcapacity is a big problem for China in many sectors. Is the Chinese business model in danger of collapse? My guest today on Hard Talk is Zhu Min, former deputy at the People's Bank of China, now a top official at the IMF. With that other Asian giant, Japan, trying to awaken from years of economic slumber, can Asia put itself on a sustainable pattern of growth that's good for its people and the rest of the world? Zhu Min, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
How much trouble is China's business and export model in?
China currently have a business model very much investment driven. We see before it was export driven, moved to investment driven, but obviously need to move to a more domestic consumption driven growth model. I think that's the issue the Chinese economy is facing. And the good news, the governments is very much understand that's the model they have to move in. And we had a very good communication with authorities. They also agree with moving to that way. I think that will be the reform agenda they're going to take.
I'll pick up that issue of increasing consumption at home in China, but just first of all, looking at it in global terms, wherever you go in the world, you hear the same thing. China is flooding our markets with ultra-cheap products. Our factories are closing down as a result, and so on and so forth. That's a fair point, isn't it?
Well, I think this is a part of the globalization, because the globalization be able to bring more and more labor into the market, and so we'll be able to bring in more a low cost but still relatively high quality product to every consumer, which is good news.
But it's more than that, isn't it? If you look at the row currently between the European Union and China, and the EU threatening to raise import tariffs on solar panels because it says that China is dumping solar panels at a price which is even lower than what it costs to actually produce, that's a different point I'm making there. It tells you that China is producing too many goods.
No, the issue is not produce too many goods. I think with the globalization, if the country can have the competitiveness, it should be able to produce as much as they can. Obviously, the point is whether there's unfair competition, right? I mean, that's the issue there. So,
but is there unfair competition? Because the point is that there is perhaps unfair competition.
Well, you can go to for example, WTO, right? Go to see how things go. I think both sides have the right to argue and to defend.
But the solar panels is just one example of overcapacity in China. If you look at what the former US Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson said, and he visits China regularly, he says it's not just clean technologies like solar panels, steel, shipbuilding, we can name all the areas, because basically China's industrial policy relies on a whole array of subsidies. It's state capitalism.
I won't take that one. I think if you see the China, on one hand, it does have the capacity issues, but the capacity issues not necessarily directly from the subsidy of the government issues, because the scale of the economy is so huge in China. When the whole world opened the market to Chinese companies, obviously they expand. For example, Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company, has more than 1 million employees, produce all the iPads. You will say it's a scale. It is a scale. It's a huge scale, right? You will say it's good. It was bad. I think this is good, right?
I mean, so I'm not saying, yes, of course, that many countries have benefited from China's rapid economic growth, especially at a time when there was a global economic downturn, and many people happily use Chinese products. But the point I'm making is this is how you have actually done it, and the fact that it's not necessarily sustainable because it relies on many state subsidies. I'll give you an example. Usha and George Haley are US-based economists, and they did a study recently looking at steel, glass, paper and auto parts in China, and they said it's not the low labour costs and undervaluations that account for China's export success. It's the subsidies which account for about 30% of industrial output. Most of the companies we looked at would probably be bankrupt without these subsidies.
This is two different issues, I would say. The first issue is we talk about the scale. As I said, China does have a scale issues, overcapacity, and it's a serious challenge for sustainability of the Chinese economy.
What do you mean there's a skills shortage? Or what do you mean by
no, it's
skills problem?
overcapacity issues because they build the capacities and very much expect to strong growth, but with external demand is weakening, obviously, as not as strong as before because we have relatively moderate global economic growth. Obviously, this is overcapacity become theories.
So that's right. That's why I say originally you're making too many things which people, because of the slowdown economically, globally, are not buying. Okay, that's one issue. But what about the issue of state subsidies? Because until 3 years ago, you were basically Deputy Governor of China's central bank, and you know that this kind of support was given by the state.
Well, I would say there's a lot of talking about the subsidies issues on China. There's the same thing about the subsidies talk about in Europe, in the other part of the world, right? But we're very good. We have a WTO, which is international institutes.
The World Trade Organization.
World Trade Organization is to supposed to play the role to handle those issues. So it is very easy for both sides to defend, to argue, and to bring the information on the table. I think that's the way to solve it.
All right. With now growth in China slipping to about 7.5%. China's new leaders have said, that President Xi Jinping and the others have said they want to tackle this issue of overcapacity because the slowdown in economic growth means that some of these companies that have benefited from China's huge stimulus package now face very painful choices. They have to lose employees, close down factories and so on, and that is a big, big problem now, isn't it?
Chinese economic growth is slowing down, that's very true. And compared with a few years ago, it's more than 10%. Now, we still forecast 7.8% from FOM, which is slowing down by Chinese standard, but by the world standard, it's still very strong growth, I think is number one. And number two, China has a lot of space, has a lot of fiscal space, monetary policy space, and debt is way low, so there's room to stimulate economies. But the key issues, as you mentioned, it's not the growth, it's really the quality of the growth. So the whole thing is that China needs to change the growth model, move into the more consumption-driven domestic growth model, which means you need to give the people more earnings so people can consume more and rather only focus on exports, on investments as well, which is a big change.
But how do people earn more if you are perhaps in a danger now? Because as I said, the business model has been so dependent on state subsidies and so on that you're going to have to close factories down if these goods are not going to be bought either domestically or externally.
For example, open the service sector. China still have a low rate of service sector. If you open the service sector, let people move in, and there's a lot of opportunity to let people to make money. You want people consume more. The first issue, you want people making more money, right? This is more important, so they can spend. So you have to create a more opportunity for them. For service sector is a big area.
So, okay, expand the service area and so on, but also address the reason why the Chinese consumer does not spend and likes to save very much. That's largely because, a large part of it is because they don't feel secure about their future. They think, oh, when I reach 70, 75, who's going to look after me? I better start saving. So you also have to increase public spending on health, on education and a welfare system in order to say to people, you don't have to save so much. You know, we're going to look after you when you're older. You can start spending.
Yeah, you give the answer. I agree with you.
Yeah, but why haven't they done that? I mean,
no, they are doing that. Actually, China is building the social security system gradually. It's not easy. China is provide the healthcare now, give almost everyone, but obviously it's a very low level. And so building the system, but it's just to take time. You're absolutely right. And there are two things. China have a very high saving rate, like 49% of GDP is way high. Why? Number one is cultural reasons. People do have a saving culture is number one. But the most important thing, as you said, that people feel uncertain, for their futures, so they save more.
But you say this is being done and recognised as a problem, and we know that. However, you need to do this fairly quickly, because as we say, it may be good by international levels, but growth is slowing in China, which is going to cause possible problems, and you're going to have to address this problem, but how quickly can you do it?
The government is very much committed. We just had a region we call the Article 4 consultation. That's mean the annual sort of surveillance. We have a conversation with the authorities, talk about the macro situations. And the government is very much agree with us, and changing the growth model is the top priority.
I keep on saying you, of course, and I'm referring to the fact that when you were a senior Chinese official, deputy governor, as I say, of the central bank, the People's Bank of China. But looking at you now with your IMF hat on. You are deputy head, you're deputy to Christine Lagarde at the IMF. The IMF is setting a lot of store on Asia leading the global recovery. It says that for Asia as a whole, I think there'll be 5.7% growth. But with what we've just been discussing about the issues in China and the huge challenges, is that optimism perhaps misplaced?
I think you have a good point. That Asia, particularly emerging Asia, growth rates are slowing down on China's and India's and a few other economies and slowing down. On the second issue, the emerging Asia's financial market has been very volatile because the concerns about the U.S. rewriting of the non-conventional monetary policies. You will see in India, in Indonesia, and a few the financial markets is very, very much volatile. So there are concerns about economic growth and for Asia. But overall in Asia, I think the few things very important. Number one, the policy space is still there. The fiscal space, the monetary policy space is still there for Asia generally. Number two, on the debt level is relatively low. I mean the government debt level, the corporate debt level, the household debt level. Compared with 1997, the Asia financial crisis, today's debt level even lower than that time. So Asia, yes, the growth is slowing down, mostly because external issues, spillover impact, but a lot of room, and still we see Asia will be able to move into the solid growth.
What about that big giant in Asia, Japan, the world's third biggest economy, embarking on a very ambitious program of economic reform under the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe? It's been called Abenomics, and many people are saying, look, it's early days yet, we see how it goes, but basically increasing government spending by about $100 billion, pumping money into the financial system, some structural reforms in labour and so on and so forth. But do you think at the IMF that Japan is on the right track?